Thank you, Tom, so much for coming and being accessible for this interview. We really appreciate it. Do you mind pronouncing your first and last name and then also spelling it for me?
First name Tom and last name Henderson.
Okay.
Spelled normal way with an H and S-O-N at the end.
Great. Now, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born and raised?
Yep, lifelong Detroiter. Born on the west side. Was part of that outflow from the city in the 1950s when they built the freeways, and my dad got a Veterans Housing Authority loan and new houses in the brand new suburbs of St. Clair Shores. But been in the area my whole life. Started my career as a sports writer. Well, I backed it up. Started my career in what was basically 19th century journalism, which was sharpening pencils and filling glue pots at the Detroit Free Press. I had been recommended by my advisor. I was in a master's program in journalism at Michigan State. I'd never taken a journalism course as an undergraduate. I was a political science major, but I didn't feel like getting out of school yet, so I looked in the handbook, and the journalism program was the easiest master's program to get into. It had the fewest requirements. So I got in there. I had never taken a journalism class. I didn't know what I was doing. I was really wasting everyone's time, and my advisor suggested that I do him in the world of journalism in Michigan State a favor and quit school and do something else. So I moved back to Detroit, got a job at the Uniroyal Tire Factory on Jefferson, and took a day off after a few months, went downtown in a sport coat and just started applying everywhere for jobs. And miraculously got hired at the Free Press, not in any journalism capacity, but as a grunt called copy boy, and you got people their coffee and you ran out to their parking meters and put nickels and dimes in their parking meters. And if a child got killed in a bus accident, you drove out to their home and begged their parents for a photo and got people their lunch and sharpened pencils and filled glue pots and did all kinds of cool things that ended up being like great training for actually becoming a reporter. Was a sports writer, accidentally migrated into the world of business reporting, and was freelancing for many, many years for the Free Press, the Detroit News, and for national running publications, Runner's World and Running Times. Got a call out of the blue in 1998 or so, might have been 1999. The Detroit News had just started including email addresses at the bottom of columns. And I was sitting on the front porch of my house in Detroit reading the paper one morning, and Laura Berman, who had been a colleague of mine at the Free Press many years earlier, had a column in the Detroit News that had her email address at the bottom. So I had just gotten an email myself, so I went in and I sent her an email and said, "Hey, voice from the past, Tom Henderson, we ought to have lunch someday." 10 minutes later, the phone rings, and I pick it up, and a woman says, "Hi, I'm Jane Distel. I have a literary agency in New York. Are you interested in doing a true crime book for St. Martin's Press?" And the chances of a very well-regarded New York agent calling a freelance writer in Detroit and offering him a book project for St. Martin's Press, you have a much better chance of getting hit by lightning. I mean, seriously, it is not something that ever happens. So I, of course, said yes. I'd never done a book. I said yes, and then I said, "How did you come to call me?" And she said, "There's this really interesting case. It's a defense attorney who's been accused of murdering his wife. He was having an affair with a judge. It's in Warren, Michigan, a suburb where you're at. I have one of my authors." I called, and she had just moved from Detroit to Miami and couldn't do it. I asked her if she could recommend anyone. She recommended a columnist at the Detroit News named Laura Berman, who had covered the arraignment. I just called Laura. She said she's going through a divorce and just wouldn't emotionally be able to take on a huge project. And when I said, "Well, can you recommend anyone?" she said, "Oh yeah, Tom Henderson's an old colleague of mine. Here's his phone number and his email address." So that's how I became a true crime reporter.
Great. And I know, speaking about the Mio murders, where did you first hear about it? Did you hear it through the book company?
No, I I lived in St. Clair Shores in 1985, and Brian Ogden, who's one of the two deer hunters who went missing and were murdered, was from St. Clair Shores. The other, David Till, was from Troy, another suburb of Detroit. And when they went missing, it was just a huge local news story. It was on, all the TV and radio stations. It was in the Free Press and News for months. Deer hunting is a big pastime in Michigan, and when two young guys just disappear, fall off the face of the earth, it's news. So I'd been well aware of the disappearance, and every few years there'd be a story about whatever happened to, and here's what has happened since, and there was all kinds of rumors and dead ends and speculation and theories. So you'd follow that. And 1999, well, maybe into 2000, 2001, suddenly the news broke that two guys had been arrested and charged with the murders. And so I followed that. There was a trial in 2003. Right about the time the trial was gearing up was when I finished my first true crime book for St. Martin's. They liked it well enough to ask if I was interested in signing a 2-book contract, which I was. So suddenly I was obligated to come up with 2 more books, and this seemed like a perfect case. So I'd done another book as the first of the 2-book contract, and when that was done, I then reached out to Bronco and Donna and got on board for it to be my 3rd book.
Okay, great. And I know in previous conversations you mentioned that Bronco and Donna were definitely the meat of why you were able to complete your book, Darker Than Night,
Yep.
which, if you don't mind, can you hold it up?
Yep.
How was the encounter between you two? Because you had this, story in your head, and you wanted to be able to, of course, depict it, accurately. How was that encounter as, the first person you would be going to see?
And let me do a preface here by telling you that I have absolutely no idea why this book is called Darker Than Night, unless it's symbolic of the villain's heart being darker than night. The crime itself happened at night, but it happened on a night with almost a full moon with fresh snow on the ground, so it was almost as bright as day, which is why a witness was able to see what happened. The book also, you can't tell on camera, but if you look real closely, it's a cabin surrounded by ferns. And ferns don't grow in the winter. When this book took place, it grows in the summer. So I wasn't responsible for the name. Probably sells well. Darker Night sort of sounds scary and eerie. Now, the second book I did was called Blood Justice. It was about a serial killer in Flint, a really nasty guy. And the cop that broke that case was a state police lieutenant named Mike Larson. And in getting to know Mike well and getting a lot of cooperation from him, he happened to mention in passing that if you ever come across this guy named Bronco Lesneski, he's a legend in the Michigan State Police. He's by far the best detective ever in the history of the state police. He's really a cool guy. Well, I finished Blood Justice and I start to get ready to do this book on the missing deer hunters, and coincidentally it turns out that this guy named Bronco Lesneski is the lead detective on it. So I called him and left a message that, hey, Mike Larson from the Flint State Police said you're the best detective in Michigan and I ought to reach out to you for a book I want to do. And Bronco called back and he said, hey, Mike Larson's a wonderful guy. It's great to hear him telling lies about me, but yeah, come on up, I'll be happy to meet you. So I drove up to East Tawas, which is a tourist town on Lake Huron, where Bronco had a post. He had just, relatively recently had been named a lead detective out of that post. And went in to meet Bronco. And when you're a reporter meeting police, often the response is not good. Typically, they're not real happy to see reporters. There's sort of an institutional bias against reporters. You have to break down barriers. A lot of times you have to convince them that you're not, the enemy of the people. You're just here to do a job and to tell their story. Bronco wasn't anything like that. He was just completely disarming and charming from the bat. And we sat down in his office and I said, you're off the record now. I just want to get to know you a little bit and I'll come back for, interviews and start the formal process. And he said, well, always thought there might be somebody like you showing up one day. So he says, I've got a surprise for you. And what had happened is when he inherited this missing cold case, the deer hunters, in 1998 or 1999. He literally inherited a huge cardboard box filled with reports that was stuck into a closet.
From previous detectives.
From previous detectives.
There was a bunch, and I didn't realize
it went on for years because there were reports coming in from sightings from everywhere. And originally it was thought they were in the western part of the state, and there was a search for them there. There was a number, a dozen at least, police agencies around the state who over the years did investigations, filed reports. Lots of names that got mentioned that had nothing to do with it ultimately. But he inherited this chaotic mess, and nobody expected this case to ever get solved. And the person that kind of turned it all over to him said, officially it's still open. Nobody expects you to do anything. It sits in that closet, and that's where, don't worry about it. Well, Bronco said to himself, no, if that was my family member, no, they're not going to put my family member's investigation in a cardboard box in a closet. So Bronco had pulled out these hundreds and hundreds of pages and spent in his own spare time putting it all in chronological order, collating it, and making an index. And he ended up with 3 loose leaf binders in chronological order with an index. So every name that was mentioned anywhere, it would pop up on what page of those 3 books the name was. And some names were mentioned once, some names were mentioned twice, some names are mentioned 40 and 50 times. You sort of get a feel of, there seems to be an aim here at certain individuals.
And did you have access to be able to
Well,
that back?
well, what Bronco said, and not only did he bring out these 3 nicely organized loose leaf books, he said, this is my copy. I made a copy for whoever was going to be the prosecutor on the case. And he said, I just made a 3rd copy, but don't tell anyone. I made a 3rd copy in case a reporter came by and needed a copy. And that would probably be you. And I said, that would exactly be me. And he said, I don't have it here. It's over in the Tawas, in the West Branch office. And he said, but next time you come up, we'll go get it. So suddenly I had a copy of every report organized with an index that cross-referenced everything that had happened in 15 or 16 years of investigation. Now, segue to Donna's involvement. I had to reach out to Donna. And again, with prosecutors, you don't know what their attitude is toward reporters, and it turned out that Donna got along with reporters real well. She's very colorful, very quotable, and it's not like they were covering cases she blew or lost. She was always getting credited with putting somebody in jail for a long time who deserved it. So she was approachable and accessible. And right about the time I introduced myself to her, she asked if I would like a copy of the trial transcript, because by the time I got involved, you're not going to do a book about people who are found not guilty. So typically, and I'm not going to spend 4 weeks or 6 weeks at a trial just to find out that somebody was found not guilty and there's no book. So me and St. Martin's and my agent were all waiting to see what happened. These guys were found guilty. Suddenly there's a book. So that puts you behind the 8 ball, because it's a lot easier, obviously, if you're at the trial taking notes than if you're not at the trial. So I met with Donna, and she was, would you like a transcript of the trial? And I was like, yeah. And it was thousands of pages. And she said, I'll have an intern make you a copy. Don't tell anybody you got it from me. Well, if you have to buy a transcript from the court reporter, it'll cost you maybe $3 a page. And if there's 10,000 pages, it's a $30,000 tab. And I don't make $30,000 on these books, and St. Martin's isn't going to pay it. So suddenly I had a transcript that cost me nothing. And so here is Bronco taking care of me on one end, and Donna's taking care of me on the other end. And now all I have to do is not screw it up.
Now, one thing I love about your book, first off, your book is amazing. I love the way that you so colorfully paint the perspectives of everybody involved, whether it's the witnesses, whether it's the police department and who's involved in trying to solve it across the world, whether it's the prosecutor. I love it. How did you get all the information you needed to paint the perspectives? Was it through the transcripts of the trial, or was it through you actually interviewing?
A lot of it is interviews and a lot of it's the transcript, because somebody in the trial might be talking about what happened, and the defense attorney is, well, how could you be sure of that? And, you know, a lot of times they'll get into state of mind. What I thought when I heard this, and then what I thought when I heard this. So when you're recounting all of this stuff, some of it ends up, there's parts of the book where it's all about the trial. Some of the book is 10 years earlier when things were happening that would later come out in the trial. So I might take some evidence from the trial and not put it in the trial part of the book. It goes into maybe the 1987 portion of the book where somebody's, you know, and you're in their head and it's like so-and-so felt like this, and, you know, well, how do I know that? Well, because they said so later under oath 20 years later. But if you just do here's what happened at trial from A to Z, it gets pretty boring. You want to do some of that, what happened at the time, what were people thinking. So you can do some of that, a lot of that, without doing any interviews. It's just what they've said either in police reports or what they said on the record in trials. And then there's interviewing Barb Boudreau, who was the main witness who broke this case open, spending a lot of time with her, spending a lot of time with Branko Lesniewski, spending a lot of time with Donna, spending a lot of time with the Till family, getting people to break down their barriers, and again, the family telling you what was going on when their loved one went missing.
And how did you gain that trust from the family members coming in as a reporter?
Well, you know what? I take my dog everywhere with me. Dogs are great barrier breakers. You reach out to families after the fact. There's one thing if you're a reporter at the time and you get to know them during the course of the trial or the investigation. You call after the fact and say, hey, I'm a reporter with St. Martin's Press. There's sort of you feel kind of guilty because it's you're going to benefit and you're going to get enriched by their pain. And I always feel a bit of guilt when I'm reaching out to, the Till family to say, oh, by the way, I want to do a book on your suffering, and can I come out and meet you? And you talk about a real reluctance, and people are by and large far more gracious and generous than you think they will be. And part of it is they don't see you as, oh, here's this reporter who wants to benefit from my pain. They sort of see it as a chance to tell somebody else about what a great guy David Till was, or what a great guy Brian was. If you're going to do a book, they want it in there. They want their loved one in there the way they saw them. But you meet with these folks, and there's a reluctance and a shyness. I always really quickly work into the conversation that, oh, I'm so happy to meet you, and so forth. And I said, it worked out for me because there's a park near here, and I took my dog for a run first, and, she's waiting in a car. Oh, bring her in, we love dogs. I got this real personable black lab. So once you've got the dog in the house, you're home free. They're going to be petting the dog, and next thing you know, they're giving the dog a biscuit, and the next thing you know, they're giving you everything that you need.
Also in the book, one thing that I like is that you take time in the middle of the book to include pictures of, whether it's of David or Brian or the actual bar that they were last seen. How was the vibe in the area once you were taking those pictures? Did you feel any type of
Yeah, the easy ones were some of the restaurants and bars where they'd been seen before they went missing. You just get out of a car and you snap a photo. The family photos, again, that's the trust part, where you get to know them. You come out and visit David Till's mom and dad 3 or 4 times. At some point, you're like, I hate to really do this, but do you have any photos I can borrow? And again, they're usually like, oh, here's a really cool one of when he was a kid, or here's one that... There was, Branko took me around one day, and he's a dog guy too, so he had his state police SUV with my dog in the back seat, and we drove around all of the scenes that were in the book, places where they had heard that there were bodies, like under underwater behind a dam where they send in a dive team, or other places where they were hunting in the woods. There'd been a report that they'd been killed in the woods. So he spent a day taking me around to all the scenes in the book. At one point, he took me to a house in the middle of nowhere where Coco Duvall had once lived. And he hung out with a biker drug element, crazy guys. And there were two of them that Bronco knew well over the years of having arrested them or investigated them. And in the midst of, and we pulled up in front of this house for me to photograph it. It was just a mess. It was car parts and refrigerator parts in the yard and tires, and it was like something out of Appalachia. And so Bronco, and he had an unmarked SUV. It was a state police car, but it was unmarked. So he slunk down behind the wheel. He says, these guys do not like me. It will not go well if they see me. So he slunk down. I got up and I started taking pictures of the house. Well, right as I did that, two guys walk out, beards down, down to their belly button. They're now 60 years old, but they still think they're biker dudes. They look at me and wonder, what are you doing? And I'm a good liar, so I just said, I'm just scouting out for my wife properties up north. We're looking to invest. And he's like, wait, you want to buy? Come back and we'll talk. Thank you very much, sir. And I get back in the car and they go back in the house and Bronco's just dying laughing. Like somebody want to come and take pictures to show their wife of this property.
Wow. Wow. And now while you were in town, were you able to speak to anybody else or anybody who felt like they had a testimony to share?
No, most of that, first of all, people had dispersed. There were a lot of people that were called back to the trial that had moved on and gone to other places. But so much of that was available. I was able to quote people either directly from police testimony they gave, police reports, or from the trial transcripts. So I didn't need. There were some people I had to talk to. A lot of them I didn't. I could just pull their stuff out and use it. It was in the public domain.
Okay. Now you did have a chance to snap a picture of Barb, which is the main witness who actually led to the conviction of the Duvalls. How do you feel that she could have helped speed, I guess, the solving of the case a lot faster? Do you feel like there's any blame on the topic?
No, I don't feel there is. The Duvall brothers and extended family, it wasn't just two brothers, they were the ones convicted, but they were a large extended criminal family. This family was proof of evolution. They had evolved along a criminal path and they were masters of criminal behavior. And when I say that, they lived comfortably in a world of stealing cars at night and parting them out, cutting them into parts, selling them, taking them to, operating their own chop shops. They did that as efficiently as they poached salmon up north or poached deer or tied up to the local electric line and were able to do it without electrocuting themselves and steal electricity for their houses. They were wonderful criminal elements, and they were nasty and without conscience, and they loved getting in brawls, whether it was with each other or whether it was with people in the community, and they were killers. And if you live, the northeast part of Michigan is completely different from the northwest part. The northwest near Traverse City, it's orchards and craft breweries and startup tech communities and bed and breakfasts and motels and this incredibly thriving tourist community. The northeast part along Lake Huron is hard scrabble, no industry, no jobs, very little tourism, except during deer season. These are hard lives being led by hard people in many cases. And nobody was going to make their life harder by being the man or the woman that squealed on the Duvalls. So people were just going to turn the other way, let it go. And it wasn't as if two local beloved people got killed. These were two guys from Detroit. If they're from Detroit area, they're probably bad apples in people's minds up there, who'd made asses of themselves in bars with the locals and had pissed people off and seemed like, bad guys themselves, and you know, nobody's saying, yeah, it's all right to kill these guys, but nobody was losing a whole lot of sleep over it. So Bronco inherited this case, and he inherits this cardboard box, and he says, no, if this was my family, this would not be the way I want it treated. So in his own time, he had an incredible workload. He was covering every major crime in like 4 counties. Local sheriff's departments, if something big happened, they didn't investigate it. They turned it over to the state police. So Bronco had this incredible workload. And on his own time, before work and after work and on weekends and on his days off and on holidays, he thought he knew the last place that these guys had been seen alive. And he just started going out in concentric circles. He just started knocking on doors and saying, hi, I'm Bronco Lesneski, here's my card, I'm investigating, and people, I don't know anything, I don't know anything, I don't know anything. And one winter day, he knocks at Barb Boudreaux's house, and she was the one that it turned out, you know, 14 or 15 years earlier had been in the woods and saw these guys get killed. She says, if I tell you what I know, they'll kill me too. And she starts to close the door. Only time in his career he literally put his foot in the door and wouldn't let somebody close it. Came into the house and started talking to her. And she wasn't going to talk. She was terrified.
And because of that, he built a relationship over the years trying to get her comfortable.
He spent the next two and a half years becoming her friend. If she needed something fixed on her roof, Bronco was there on a Saturday with a ladder. If she needed wood cut, if she needed a fence replaced. And he's a nice, likable guy. He's this very charming character. And he spent years, he thought, if nothing else, I'm just being a nice guy, and maybe I'll crack this case. At some point, Donna Pendergast, they revived the investigation. They subpoenaed her, and I think they subpoenaed her to Lansing to meet with Donna and to talk under oath. She hadn't, for the record, said she'd given bits and pieces and hints that she knew something but wouldn't talk. No, I didn't really know something. Yes, I did. Contradictory stuff. They subpoena her. She's sitting there with the tape rolling, saying, I really don't know anything. At one point, she reaches over, turns the tape off, turns to Bronco and says, I know everything, don't you? And he says, yeah. And she's like, okay, let's go on the record. And then she proceeded to tell, how she came to be in the woods the night that she saw these 2 guys get beat to death with baseball bats.
Now, one thing I saw that was difficult in the trial to actually, solidify that conviction was the fact that she had a reputation of being this drinker and this, person who wanted attention. And so people kind of found it hard to want to trust what she had to say. What is your opinion?
She was a hard-drinking, wild party girl, having sex with everyone in the neighborhood and getting kicked out of bars for being drunk and causing a ruckus. Not what you'd consider your ideal witness in a murder case. And there had been at one point for a while a $100,000 reward that she eventually thought she might get, but by the time that happened, people who had put up the reward had disappeared or the businesses had gone out of business. But also by the time the trial came along, she wasn't that wild and crazy person anymore. She was like a grandmother, and she was winning like baking contests at the county fair every year. And she, so it was a little easier for her to go up on the witness stand and come across as as far more credible than if she'd been up there 15 or 16 years earlier when she still was the wild woman a mile.
Okay, and so you have all this information, you're putting together, everything with the trial transcripts, your own interviewing, being, able to go and ride with Bronco and talk with him. What was the most difficult part of gathering all that information and now putting it into Darker Than Night, which is your book?
Well, the most important thing when you're getting ready to go is